I don't really know why I stopped at that motel. It wasn't planned. I had been driving for hours and my eyes were heavy. I just needed a place to rest, anywhere. When I saw the flickering sign, vacancy, I pulled over without thinking. The building looked old, tired like me. The paint was peeling, and the lights in the parking lot were dim. I didn't care. I just needed a bed. The man at the front desk didn't look up when I walked in. He was hunched over a newspaper, his face hidden behind thick glasses. When I said I needed a room, he barely acknowledged me. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and pushed it toward me. The room number was scrawled in barely legible handwriting. I didn't question it. I just took the key and headed down the dark hallway. The carpet was worn and the air smelled musty, but I told myself it was fine. It was late, I was tired, and I would be out of there in the morning. The room was at the far end of the hallway, and when I unlocked the door, it creaked open like it hadn't been used in a while. Inside, the room was basic. A bed, a small table, and a lamp. The wallpaper was yellowed with age, and the bedspread looked like it had seen better days. But I didn't care. I threw my bag on the floor and plugged in my phone charger. That's when I noticed the lamp wasn't plugged in. When I bent down to reach the outlet, my hand bumped the lamp, and it fell over. That's when I saw it. The camera. It was small, barely noticeable, tucked away under the lamp, pointing directly at the bed. My heart skipped a beat. Why was there a camera in my room? I stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then the panic set in. Someone had been watching me. I felt sick. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but something made me stop. A feeling, maybe. A sense that something was very wrong. I turned back to the room, and that's when I noticed there was another camera, this time hidden in the clock on the nightstand. I froze. How many cameras were in this room? I started looking around, and the more I looked, the more I found. There was one in the vent, another in the bathroom mirror. They were everywhere. My skin crawled, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out now. But as I reached for the door, I noticed something else. The closet door was slightly open, just a crack. It hadn't been like that before. I hadn't even noticed the closet when I first came in, but now it felt like it was calling to me, pulling me toward it. I know it sounds stupid, but I had to look. I had to know what was in there. My hands were shaking as I pushed the door open. It was dark inside, and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust. At first, I thought it was just an empty space, but then I saw it. A small door in the back, barely big enough for a person to crawl through. It was open, just a sliver, but enough for me to see the glow of a screen inside. I don't know why I did it, but I reached out and opened the door. The space behind it was tiny, a cramped room with low ceilings. Inside, there were monitors, each showing a different view of the room I was just in. My room, my bed, my face, and then I saw it. The screen that showed me, standing in front of the closet from behind. I spun around, and there he was, the motel owner. He was standing in the doorway, his face split into a wide, twisted grin. His eyes were cold, dead, like he had been waiting for this moment, like he had been watching me the whole time. I don't remember much after that. I think I screamed, but I can't be sure. I just remember running, pushing past him, trying to get out of that room, out of that motel. He tried to grab me, his fingers brushing my arm, but I was faster. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, the engine roaring to life as I peeled out of the parking lot. I drove until I couldn't anymore, until I was sure he wasn't following me. I stopped at a gas station, my hands still shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I called the police, told them everything. They said they would send someone out, but by the time we got back to the motel, it was empty. The cameras were gone, the monitors, everything. It was like nothing had ever happened. The man at the front desk, the one who had been watching me, he was gone too. The police didn't believe me, of course. They said I must have been mistaken, that maybe I was tired and imagined it. But I know what I saw. I haven't stayed in a motel since. I can't. Every time I think about it, I see that twisted grin, those cold eyes watching me. I don't know if they ever caught him or if he's still out there, waiting for the next traveler to make the same mistake I did. But I know one thing for sure. I will never trust a room that isn't my own again. I had just arrived at the hotel, an old, almost forgotten place tucked away on a narrow street. My flight had been delayed, and it was late, much later than I wanted it to be. The receptionist, a pale man with tired eyes, barely looked at me as he handed over the key. His indifference felt more unsettling than rude, but I told myself it was just the hour. The hotel was quiet, too quiet. As I made my way to my room on the third floor, the carpet muffled my footsteps, and the silence pressed in on me. The walls seemed to close in, their faded wallpaper peeling in places, like the hotel had been abandoned by time. I thought maybe I was just tired, too tired to care about the odd feeling creeping up my spine. My room was small, with a single window overlooking the dark street below. I tossed my suitcase onto the bed and sat down, letting out a deep sigh. I was finally alone, finally away from the noise of the airport, the stress of travel. I didn't even bother to unpack. I just wanted to rest. But just as I was starting to relax, there was a knock at the door. It was sharp, insistent, almost impatient. I hesitated, wondering who could be knocking at this hour. I hadn't ordered room service, hadn't asked for anything. I opened the door and there stood a hotel worker holding a tray. "Compliments of the hotel," he said, not meeting my eyes. Before I could respond, he placed the tray on the small table by the window and left without another word. I stared at the tray. A plate of pasta, some bread, and a glass of what looked like wine. The smell coming from the pasta was strange, like something was off. The wine had an odd, cloudy appearance. My stomach twisted. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. I tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was just my nerves after a long day of travel. But the more I looked at the food, the more uneasy I felt. I picked up the phone to call the front desk, but the line was dead. I hung up, then picked it up again, listening to the silence. There was no dial tone, just a cold, empty silence. My heart began to race. I couldn't shake the thought that someone might be trying to poison me. It sounded crazy, paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I pushed the tray away, the sight of the food making me sick. Then, I noticed something on the floor by the door, a small folded note. I hadn't seen it when I opened the door earlier. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. The note had only 3 words: "Don't eat it." I froze, the note slipping from my fingers. My mind raced. Who had left the note? The hotel worker? Someone else? I started to panic. My breathing quickened, and I began to pace the room, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about leaving the hotel, but where would I go? It was late, and I didn't know the area. I felt trapped, cornered. I had to confront the staff. I had to find out what was going on. I grabbed my key and left the room, heading downstairs to the front desk. The receptionist was still there, still pale, still tired looking. "I didn't order any food," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me blankly. "We didn't send any food." My skin crawled. "But someone brought it to my room." And there was a note, "We don't send food to rooms unless it's ordered," he interrupted, his tone flat, uncaring. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something in his eyes stopped me. There was no concern, no interest. It was like he didn't care what happened to me. Or maybe he knew something I didn't. I backed away, feeling more lost and confused than ever. I didn't know if I could trust my own thoughts anymore. Was I imagining things? Was I losing it? I returned to my room, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The tray was gone. Someone had come in while I was downstairs. My heart pounded as I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out at me. But the room was empty, eerily so. On the table, where the tray had been, was another note. This one was longer, but the words made my blood run cold. "See you soon." I stared at the note, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "See you soon?" What did that mean? My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. I decided then and there that I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this place a moment longer. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door. But when I tried to open it, the handle wouldn't turn. The door was locked. No, not locked. Jammed. I pulled harder, yanked at it, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one came. No one answered. Panic surged through me like a wave. I was trapped. In a frenzy, I tried the window, but it was stuck too, sealed shut. I was shaking now, tears of frustration and fear burning my eyes. I was trapped, completely at the mercy of whoever was playing this sick game. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, feeling utterly hopeless. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the sound of footsteps outside my door brought me back to reality. They were slow, deliberate. I held my breath, listening as they stopped right outside. The door handle rattled and I scrambled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, just a crack, and I saw a shadow fall across the floor. I didn't wait to see who or what was there. I grabbed my suitcase and ran for the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Silence. Then, a soft knock on the bathroom door, gentle, almost polite. My heart nearly stopped. I backed away, staring at the door, my mind racing. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the knocking stopped. The silence was worse. So much worse. I stayed there, huddled in the bathroom, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I mustered the courage to open the door. The room was empty, the front door wide open. But there was no one there, no sign of the person who had knocked. Just another note lying in the middle of the room. I picked it up with trembling hands. The note had only 2 words. Check out. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my things and ran, not stopping until I was outside, away from that cursed hotel. I never looked back, not once. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is still watching me, waiting for the next time I let my guard down. I arrived at the motel late, far too late for comfort. The road had been long and empty, and my eyes burned from staring into the darkness for hours. The motel looked just as tired as I felt, with its flickering neon sign casting weak light over a parking lot that seemed to belong to another time. There were only 2 other cars parked there, both covered in a layer of dust that made them look abandoned. The receptionist didn't even glance up as I walked in, just handed me a key and muttered the room number. Something about the place felt off, but I was too exhausted to care. All I wanted was a bed, a few hours of sleep, and then to be back on the road. The room wasn't much better than the reception. The light was dim, the carpet stained, and the bed creaked when I sat on it. Still, It was a bed, and I wasn't picky. I unpacked just enough to find something to sleep in and was about to settle in when the phone rang. The sound was so sudden in the quiet room that I jumped. Who could be calling me here? I picked up the receiver, and before I could even say hello, a voice spoke. It was low and shaky, like someone terrified but trying to keep it together. They said I needed to leave the motel right now, that I wasn't safe there. They kept repeating it, almost begging me to go. I opened my mouth to ask why, but the line went dead before I could get the words out. I sat there for a moment staring at the phone. The voice hadn't sounded like a prank. It was too desperate, too real. But leave now? It was after midnight, and I was in the middle of nowhere. My car was the only way out of here, and I didn't even know where the next town was. Still, the fear in that voice gnawed at me. I decided I'd at least check the car, maybe drive out to the highway and see if there was another place to stay. I grabbed my things, stuffed them back into my bag, and hurried out to the parking lot. The night air was cool, but it didn't do anything to calm the nervous energy buzzing under my skin. I threw my bag in the back seat and slid into the driver's seat. I turned the key, expecting the engine to roar to life like always, but it didn't. Instead, it made this awful sputtering noise, like it was trying to start but couldn't quite catch. I tried again and again. Nothing. My heart started to pound harder, not from fear, but from frustration. This couldn't be happening. Not now. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't have much choice. Then, just as I was about to get out of the car, the lights in the motel went out. 1 second, the parking lot was dimly lit by the neon sign and the bulbs outside the rooms. The next, it was pitch black. The kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're the last person left in the world. I froze, gripping the steering wheel like it could somehow save me. The only light came from the moon, hanging low and cold in the sky, and a distant flash of lightning that didn't bring any thunder with it. I knew I couldn't stay in the car, not with it dead like this. I had to go back inside, find the receptionist, get some help. Maybe there was a spare key for the generator or another car I could use. The hallway was even darker than the parking lot, the floor creaking under my feet like it was protesting every step I took. My breath echoed in my ears, too loud, too fast. I reached the office and knocked, but no one answered. I knocked again, harder this time, and when there was still no response, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, the chair behind the desk slowly spinning like someone had just been sitting there and left in a hurry. Panic started to rise in my chest. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was going on. I remembered seeing an emergency exit sign earlier, near the back of the motel. I hurried towards it, my footsteps too loud in the silence. As I got closer, I thought I heard something. A faint whisper, the soft sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there, just darkness and silence. My heart was racing now, every instinct screaming at me to get out. I reached the exit and pushed the door open, desperate to feel the night air on my face again. But what I saw made me freeze. The receptionist was lying just outside the door, their eyes wide open, staring at nothing. In their hand was a phone, the same kind of phone that had called my room. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The person who tried to warn me was dead, and whoever did this was still around. I didn't have time to think, only to react. I turned and ran back to my room, my mind a blur of fear and adrenaline. I slammed the door shut and shoved the dresser in front of it, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the edges. I tried the phone again, but it was dead, just like everything else. I was trapped, alone, with no way to call for help. And then I heard it. My car engine outside, roaring to life. I moved to the window, peeking out just enough to see. The car was running, but there was no one in the driver's seat. The fear that had been gnawing at me all night exploded into full-blown terror. I had to get out of here. Now. I grabbed my bag and bolted out the door, not caring if someone saw me. I threw myself into the car, slammed the door shut, and hit the gas. The tires screeched as I sped out of the parking lot, the motel disappearing in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. I just drove, faster than I ever had before, the road ahead barely visible in the weak light of my headlights. Even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not really free, that the nightmare isn't over. The car is running fine now, like nothing ever happened, but I can't get the image of that dead receptionist out of my head. I don't know who killed them or why they called me, but I do know one thing. I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next phone call, the next warning, the next time the darkness comes for me. I should have known better than to stay at that motel. I was exhausted, though, and it was the only place for miles. The neon sign flickered weakly, vacancy, barely visible through the grime. The clerk behind the counter didn't even look up when I walked in, just pushed a key towards me with a nod in the direction of the rooms. He looked like he didn't want to be there either. The room was as bad as I expected. Peeling wallpaper, a bed that creaked if I so much as breathed on it, and a damp, musty smell that clung to everything. I was too tired to care. I just needed to sleep. It was only one night, I told myself. Just get some rest and get out of here in the morning. The walls were thin, like paper. I could hear the TV in the room next to mine, some game show with canned laughter. I tried to block it out, turning over in bed, but every sound carried through the wall. The guy in the next room coughed, and I could almost feel the vibration in my chest. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, willing myself to fall asleep. But then I heard voices. At first, I thought it was the TV again, but the sound was different, muted, like people trying to keep their conversation private. My curiosity got the better of me. I knew it was wrong to eavesdrop, but there was something in their tone that made me listen closer. They were speaking in low, urgent voices, and while I couldn't make out everything, certain words and phrases slipped through. Tonight has to be done right. Won't see it coming. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was just late, and I was mishearing things. I tried to focus on something else, but my mind kept going back to those words. It sounded like they were planning something. But what? I rolled over, pressing my ear to the wall, trying to catch more. It felt stupid, like I was letting my imagination run wild, but the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. They'll be asleep. Perfect chance. I felt a chill run down my spine. The more I listened, the more certain I became that this wasn't just a casual conversation. These people were planning something. My heart raced as I caught the tail end of a sentence that made my blood run cold. Room 12, easy target. I froze. Room 12, my room. I was sure of it now. They were talking about me. I don't know how, but they had picked me. Maybe they saw me check in, noticed I was alone. I had to do something, but what? I couldn't just stay here, waiting for them to come. But if I tried to leave, they might hear me. The door creaked when I opened it earlier, loud enough to wake the dead. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, but then stopped. Who would I call? The police? What would I even say? I think my neighbors are planning to rob me? They'd probably think I was paranoid, imagining things. My mind raced, weighing my options. I could try to leave, but the thought of making noise terrified me. If they heard me, it could push them to act sooner. I needed to be smart, to think this through, but I didn't have much time. The conversation next door had stopped, and all I could hear now was the low hum of the TV. It made me feel even more exposed. I decided I couldn't just wait around. I had to move, had to get out. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the door. But as I tried to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck. No, not now. I tried again, gently at first, then with more force, but it didn't move. Panic gripped me, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead. Behind me, the noises from the other room started again. I could hear footsteps, shuffling, as if they were getting ready to leave. My mind went blank with fear. They were coming. I was sure of it now. I looked around the room frantically, searching for anything I could use to defend myself, but there was nothing. Just the old creaky furniture and my suitcase. Every noise I made seemed amplified in the silence. The rustle of my clothes, the slight creak of the floorboards. It all felt too loud. I tried the door one last time, putting my whole weight into it, but it still wouldn't move. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I backed away, my eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to open. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the door next to mine opening. I froze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, started moving towards my room. They weren't in a hurry. They knew I was trapped. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I was sure they could hear it. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping, praying that they wouldn't notice the slight movement under the door or that they'd somehow overlook my room. But the footsteps stopped right outside. I could hear them breathing, could almost feel the heat of their presence through the door. Then the doorknob turned slowly, the metal creaking as if it hadn't been used in years. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but the fear was too strong. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the door began to open, inch by inch, and then it stopped. Everything went quiet. The footsteps, the breathing, everything. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. Seconds felt like hours as I stood there, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. But nothing did. The door didn't open any further. The footsteps didn't come closer. I was too scared to check, too scared to do anything. I just stood there, my back against the wall until my legs gave out, and I slid down to the floor. And that's where I stayed, too afraid to move, until the first light of dawn peeked through the curtains. Only then did I find the courage to reach out, to push the door slightly. It swung open easily this time, but there was no one there. Just an empty hallway and my own shadow stretching long in the morning light. I didn't stay to find out what happened. I grabbed my things and left, not bothering to check out. I didn't care about the deposit. I just needed to get away from that place, away from whatever had almost happened. I still don't know if it was real, if they were really after me, or if my mind was playing tricks. But I can still hear that doorknob turning in the dead of night, and I know I'll never forget it. I don't usually get creeped out by motels. I'm on the road a lot for work, so it's just part of the job. You check in, get some sleep, check out, easy. But this one is different. I'm not even sure where it is, just somewhere off the highway. It was late, and I was tired, so I took the first exit that promised a bed. The sign outside said, Sunset Motel. Sounded nice enough. The lobby was small, just a counter, a few chairs, and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been refilled in years. The man behind the counter was polite, too polite maybe. He had this smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He asked me how my drive was, where I was headed. Standard stuff, but the way he spoke, I don't know. It felt rehearsed, like he'd said these exact words 100 times before, but I was too tired to think much about it. I got my key and found my room. It was simple, nothing special, just a bed, a TV, and a small bathroom. I tossed my bag on the floor and lay down, hoping to get some sleep before hitting the road again in the morning. That's when I noticed something strange. It was just after midnight, and I heard footsteps outside my door. That's not weird in itself, but it was the way they sounded, like whoever it was walked by at the same speed, the same distance, over and over. I figured it was just someone pacing, maybe on a phone call. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I went down to the lobby to check out. The same man was at the desk, same smile, same too polite tone. He asked how my stay was, and I told him it was fine. But as I was about to leave, something felt off. The same guest who walked by my door last night walked past me in the lobby at the same pace, with the same blank expression on his face. It was like seeing a movie replay the same scene. I shook it off and got back in my car. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. As the day went on, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I imagined it. But when night came, I found myself back on the same stretch of highway. I couldn't explain it, but it was like my car just knew the way. Before I knew it, I was pulling into the Sunset Motel again. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that I had just missed my turn, but everything felt too familiar. The lobby looked exactly the same, down to the dusty vending machine and the man at the desk with that same empty smile. This time, he didn't ask where I was headed. He just handed me the key and told me to enjoy my stay. I wanted to leave, but I was too tired to drive any further, so I went to my room. That night was worse. The footsteps started again, just after midnight. The same steady pace, the same pattern. I lay in bed, listening, counting the steps, and trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then the knocking started. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently on the door, but it got louder, more insistent. I got up to check, but when I opened the door, no one was there. The hallway was empty, silent, but I could feel someone watching me. I slammed the door and locked it, heart pounding. I didn't sleep at all that night. As soon as the sun came up, I threw my things in my bag and headed for the lobby. But when I got there, the man behind the desk just smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I didn't bother to check out. I just left. I told myself I wouldn't come back, that I'd keep driving until I found somewhere else, somewhere normal. But that night, as the sky darkened and the road stretched out in front of me, I saw the same exit sign. My hands were shaking as I took it, but I couldn't stop myself. This time, I noticed the details. The way the road curved, the way the lights flickered as I drove past. It was all the same, exactly the same. The lobby was empty when I walked in, but the man appeared behind the counter as if he'd been waiting for me. He didn't say a word, just handed me the key and smiled. I didn't go to my room right away. I stood in the lobby, watching the door, waiting for the footsteps. And they came, just like before, slow, steady, like a clock ticking down the seconds. I saw the guest walk by, the same one I'd seen the first night. I followed him, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. It didn't make sense. There was nowhere for him to go. Back in my room, the knocking started almost immediately. This time, it wasn't just one knock. It was like someone pounding on the door with both fists. I yelled, told them to go away, but the sound only got louder, more frantic. I backed away, my hands over my ears, but the noise was inside my head. I couldn't escape it. I ran to the door, threw it open, but the hallway was empty again. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I don't know how many nights I've been here now. Every time I try to leave, I end up back at the Sunset Motel. The guests are the same, the staff is the same. The footsteps, the knocking, it all happens again and again. I've tried to talk to them, to ask what's happening, but they don't answer. They just smile, like they know something I don't. I can feel the danger now. It's getting closer with every repetition. The footsteps are louder, the knocking more violent. Last night, I thought I saw someone standing in the corner of my room, just watching me. When I turned on the light, they were gone, but I know they'll be back. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know if there's a way out. Tonight, the footsteps are closer than ever. The knocking hasn't started yet, but I know it will. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened to me. If I don't make it, if I disappear, you'll know where to find me. I'll be here at the Sunset Motel, stuck in this loop, waiting for the end. Last summer, I decided to take a short trip by myself to clear my head. I found an old, remote hotel online that had good reviews, mostly saying it was quiet, peaceful, and a great place to disconnect from the world. That sounded perfect to me. After a few hours of driving, I arrived at the hotel, which looked exactly like its photos, maybe even a bit more charming in person. The place was old-fashioned but well-kept. There was a vintage feel to it, with wooden floors that creaked a little underfoot and heavy, ornate furniture that gave it a cozy yet slightly eerie atmosphere. The staff was friendly enough, but there was something odd about the way they acted, polite but distant, like they were trying too hard to avoid personal conversations. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was just looking forward to a weekend of relaxation. My room was on the second floor, with a window that overlooked a small garden. I spent the first day exploring the area, taking a walk in the nearby woods, and then returning to the hotel to read a book in the lounge. The evening was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no other guests around, or at least none that I saw. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, but I convinced myself that was part of the charm. On my way back to my room that night, I noticed something strange. A few doors down from mine, there was a room with a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the doorknob. That wasn't strange by itself, but this sign looked old and faded, like it had been there for years. The door looked a bit different too, darker wood, and it didn't seem to fit with the rest of the hallway. I felt a sudden, irrational curiosity about that room, but I brushed it off and went to bed. The next night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint creaking sounds, like someone walking slowly down the hallway. But when I opened my door to check, there was no one there. That's when I noticed it. The door with the "Do Not Disturb" sign was slightly open. Just a crack, but enough to see that the sign was now hanging crookedly. My heart started racing, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Still, the curiosity was too strong, so I crept down the hallway and pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. I expected to see an old, dusty room that hadn't been touched in years. Maybe some covered furniture, maybe nothing at all. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was dark, but the moonlight from the window illuminated enough. There were bloodstains on the floor, not old and faded, but fresh, dark red. An overturned chair lay in the center of the room, and on the wall I could make out deep scratch marks, like someone had tried to claw their way out. The air was heavy with the metallic smell of blood, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as I rushed to my room and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. What had I just seen? It looked like a crime scene, but it couldn't be, right? Maybe it was a prank, or my mind was playing tricks on me. But the blood, the chair, the scratches, they felt too real. I wanted to leave the hotel immediately, but the thought of going downstairs in the middle of the night, past that room, terrified me. I stayed in bed, too scared to move, and waited for the morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to go downstairs. The staff greeted me with the same polite, distant smiles, and I tried to bring up the room. I asked casually if anyone had stayed there recently, trying to keep my voice steady. They exchanged glances before one of them, a woman with a tight smile, told me that no one had been in that room for a long time. She said it was out of use, closed for maintenance. I almost laughed at how bad the lie was. Maintenance? After what I saw? I tried to push for more answers, but she just repeated the same thing, her smile never reaching her eyes. Feeling trapped and more confused than ever, I spent the rest of the day avoiding the staff and other guests who seemed oblivious to everything. My mind was racing with questions. Was I going crazy? Did I imagine it all? But I knew what I saw, what I felt in that moment. I was too scared to stay another night, so I decided to leave before dusk. But before I left, I had to see it again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it would be different in daylight. So, I walked back to the hallway, my steps slow and hesitant. The door was shut tight, the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging straight. I pushed it open with trembling hands, expecting to see the horror again. The room was empty. No blood, no chair, no scratches. Just an ordinary dusty room with covered furniture, like it hadn't been touched in years. I felt dizzy, like the floor was slipping out from under me. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to explain it. I turned around and left the hotel without looking back. As I drove away, I saw another car pulling into the parking lot. A young couple got out, laughing and talking, clearly excited for their weekend getaway. I watched as they headed inside, and for a moment, I felt a deep urge to warn them, to tell them to stay away from that room, but I didn't. I couldn't. I don't know if what I saw was real or not. Maybe the hotel is playing some sick game, or maybe it's just me losing my mind. But I can't shake the feeling that the cycle will continue, that someone else will find that room, and they won't be as lucky as I was to leave. I had to go back. It wasn't just about closure. It was about understanding what happened to Sophia. 3 years ago, she disappeared without a trace, and the last place she was seen was this old, creepy motel in the middle of nowhere. The police said she probably just ran away, but I knew better. Sophia wouldn't have just left. Something happened here, and I needed to know what. The drive was long, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt of the motel's parking lot. The place looked worse than I remembered from the photos, a relic of a time when road trips were more common, now falling apart and forgotten. The neon sign flickered weakly, almost as if it was struggling to stay alive. Vacancy, it read, though I doubted it ever said anything else. I checked in without any problems. The man at the front desk was old, his skin pale and wrinkled, as if he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He barely looked at me as he handed me the key, a heavy, rusted thing attached to a piece of wood with the number 12 etched into it. "Room 12, he muttered, his voice raspy, like it hurt to speak. I hesitated for a moment before asking if he remembered Sophia. His eyes flickered up just for a second, but he quickly looked away. "No, never heard of her," he replied, a little too quickly. Room 12 was exactly as I expected, dingy, with faded wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle. It smelled of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic and unpleasant. But it was what I was looking for. This was the room Sophia stayed in, the last place she was ever seen. As I set my bag down, I noticed something odd. The nightstand drawer was slightly open, and inside, I found a small notebook, old and worn. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding as I realized it was Sophia's handwriting. The entries were normal at first, just notes about her trip, but they quickly became more erratic. The last entry was cut off mid-sentence. "I think someone is watching me. And that was it. No more words, just a blank page. I started to feel uneasy, like the walls were closing in on me. I decided to look around the room more carefully. Under the bed, I found something that made my blood run cold, a small gold bracelet. It was Sophia's. I was sure of it because I had given it to her for her birthday a few months before she disappeared. It didn't make sense. If she left, why would she leave without this? The next morning, I tried to get more information from the motel staff, but they were all the same, detached, distant, almost like they were avoiding me. When I asked about Sophia, some said they remembered her, others claimed they had never seen her. It was like they were trying to confuse me, to make me doubt myself. By the third day, I was barely sleeping. Every noise outside my door made me jump, and I kept thinking about that last entry in Sophia's notebook. I felt like I was being watched too. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, or if there really was someone or something keeping an eye on me. Then I found the door. It was hidden behind a large, dusty mirror in the corner of the room. The hinges were rusted, and it took all my strength to pull it open. Behind it was a small, dark space, more like a crawl space than a room. The smell hit me first. Stale air mixed with something rotten. I shone my flashlight inside and saw what I had been dreading. More of Sophia's things. Her backpack, her shoes, even her camera. They were all there, covered in dust, like they had been there for years. My hands were shaking as I picked up the camera. It was old, but it still had some battery left. I flipped through the photos, my heart racing with every click. The last few pictures were blurry, taken in a hurry, but I could make out the inside of the room, the bed, the nightstand. The last photo was the worst. It was a picture of Sophia, her face twisted in fear, eyes wide, staring at something, or someone, behind the camera. But it wasn't just fear in her eyes. It was a look of realization, like she knew who it was. I had to get out. I didn't care about finding out more. I just wanted to leave. But when I tried, my car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died over and over. The parking lot was empty, not a soul in sight. I ran back inside, trying to get help, but the front desk was empty too. The old man was gone, and the place was silent, as if everyone had vanished. That night, I locked myself in the room. I didn't trust anyone, and I didn't know what to do. I could feel the walls closing in, the air growing heavier with every breath. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. In the early hours of the morning, I heard it, a soft, scraping noise, like something was being dragged across the floor outside my door. My heart stopped. I held my breath, listening, hoping it was just my imagination. But the noise didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it was right outside my room. Then, it stopped. Silence. I waited, my hands gripping the edge of the bed until I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door, just a crack, and looked out. The hallway was empty, but there, right in front of my door, was a small gold bracelet. Sophia's bracelet, the one I had found in the room. Only now, it was covered in blood. I ran. I didn't stop until I was miles away, driving as fast as I could. I never went back to that motel, and I never told anyone what I found. But I know I'm not safe. I can feel it. Wherever I go, it's like something is following me, watching, waiting for the right moment. And I know, deep down, that one day it will catch up to me, just like it did with Sophia. I was driving for hours, and when I finally saw the hotel, it felt like a relief. The sign was old, the lights flickering weakly, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to sleep. It was late, and I was exhausted. The receptionist barely looked up when I entered. She seemed busy, but I couldn't see what she was doing. When she handed me the key, she didn't say much, just a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something about the hotel felt off. It was too quiet, like the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, but I was too tired to think much about it. The hallway to my room was long and dimly lit, the kind of place that echoes every footstep. When I reached my room, I just wanted to collapse into bed. But when I opened the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. There were clothes hanging in the closet, a toothbrush on the sink, and a half-open suitcase on the bed. Someone was clearly staying here. I felt my heart race as I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. I rushed back to the reception, trying to stay calm. I told the receptionist there was someone else's stuff in my room. She looked at me with this strange expression, like I was bothering her with something trivial. "That's not possible," she said. "No one has checked into that room today. It's empty." I stood there, confused and frustrated. How could she say that when I just saw the things in there? But she wasn't budging. "There must be a mistake," she added, her tone dismissive. "Just go back to your room. Everything is fine." Everything was not fine. But what could I do? Arguing with her felt pointless, so I hesitated, then slowly walked back to the room. As I walked back, I thought maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe they just forgot to clean the room after the last guest checked out. I tried to convince myself of that, but when I opened the door again, the unease crept back. The belongings were still there, unchanged, as if waiting for their owner to return at any moment. I pushed the suitcase aside, feeling a strange guilt, and sat on the edge of the bed. I noticed the bedspread was a little rumpled, like someone had been sitting there before me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump. The sound of water dripping from the sink, the creak of the old building settling, the faint hum of the air conditioning. All of it made me feel like I wasn't alone. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I felt something was very wrong. The next morning, I was more determined to get to the bottom of this. I checked the bathroom and noticed the shower was damp, like it had been used recently. But I hadn't taken a shower yet. That was it. I needed answers. When I confronted the receptionist again, she was colder, almost like she was annoyed with me. "I told you," she said, her voice hard. "That room is empty. You're the only one staying there." Her insistence was starting to freak me out. Why was she lying? I began to think about all the stories I'd heard, about shady hotels with dark secrets, and I started to wonder if I had stumbled into one of them. There were no other staff around, and I hadn't seen any other guests. It was like the hotel was empty, except for me and this strange receptionist. Back in my room, I started to look for clues, anything that could explain what was going on. I went through the suitcase feeling guilty again, but I had to know. There were clothes, toiletries, nothing unusual, until I found a small notebook. I flipped through it, and my blood ran cold. The entries were brief, but they were enough to paint a picture. Whoever had written this was paranoid, scared, and they kept mentioning someone following them, watching them. The last entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. I dropped the notebook, my hands shaking. The realization hit me hard. Something had happened to the person who stayed here before me, and now, the hotel was pretending they never existed. That evening, I decided I couldn't stay there another night. I packed my things quickly, trying not to think about the missing person or what might have happened to them. But as I was about to leave the room, I heard footsteps outside my door. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right in front of my door, and there was a knock, soft, almost polite. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't answer. The knock came again, this time more insistent. I backed away from the door, not sure what to do. After a moment, the door handle turned slowly, and I realized in horror that it wasn't locked. The door creaked open just a little, and I caught a glimpse of the receptionist's face through the crack, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You're not leaving," she said, her voice low and final. "You belong here now." Panic took over, and I bolted for the window. I managed to open it and climb out onto the fire escape. As I scrambled down, I glanced back up at the window. The receptionist was standing there, watching me with a smile that chilled me to the bone. I didn't stop running until I was far away from that hotel. I didn't care about my car, my luggage, or anything else I left behind. I just needed to get away. I never reported what happened to the police. I didn't think they'd believe me, and honestly, I just wanted to forget the whole thing. But I can't. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can still feel her eyes on me, like she's waiting for me to come back. I didn't plan on coming to this cabin. My life was spinning out of control, and I just needed to get away. The chaos at work, my failing relationship, it was too much. So, when I found this remote cabin online, I booked it on a whim. The pictures showed a cozy old place surrounded by trees, far from anyone who might know me. That's exactly what I needed. Just me and my thoughts. The first night, everything seemed normal, almost too perfect. The cabin was old but had this charm, like it had seen a lot of life. The furniture was worn but comfortable, and the smell of wood and dust filled the air. The windows, though, were new. That stood out to me. Why would anyone replace the windows in such an old place? But I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to the owner wanting to keep the cold out. I slept deeply that first night, the kind of sleep that only comes when you're far from your troubles. I didn't even dream, which was a relief. But that sense of peace shattered when I woke up the next morning. The first thing I noticed was the cold. I shivered under the blankets, confused. Then I saw it. The window beside the bed was broken, glass shards scattered across the floor. The wind blew in, carrying the smell of pine and something else. Something metallic? I turned my head, and that's when I saw the blood. There was a dark stain on the floor right next to my bed. My heart raced, and I shot up, only to stumble as pain shot through my foot. I looked down and saw a cut, deep enough to bleed, but not so deep that I couldn't walk. I didn't remember breaking the window. I didn't remember cutting my foot. In fact, I didn't remember anything after I went to bed. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I had an accident, and it wasn't as bad as it looked. But as I cleaned up the glass and bandaged my foot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. How could I not remember breaking the window? Did I sleepwalk? The thought made me uneasy. As the day went on, more strange things started to happen. I found a jacket draped over a chair in the living room, a jacket I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine, and I hadn't seen it the night before. I checked the pockets, but they were empty. I also noticed muddy footprints near the front door, leading from the porch into the house. But I didn't remember going outside after I arrived. My anxiety grew with every passing hour. I couldn't explain any of it, and the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My memory was full of gaps, and my body felt strange, like it didn't belong to me. I kept checking my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely alone. That night, I was too scared to sleep. I sat on the bed, my eyes fixed on the broken window, now covered with a sheet I had taped over it. Every creak of the old house made my heart pound. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. I froze, listening as they got closer and closer until they stopped right outside the door. The door creaked open. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and held it up, ready to swing. A shadow moved into the room, and I saw the shape of a person who looked almost exactly like me. It felt like I was staring at a mirror, but it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't me. The person, or thing, stood there, looking at me with a blank expression. My mind raced. Was I hallucinating? Dreaming? The lamp shook in my hand as I demanded to know who they were, but the figure didn't answer. It just watched me, like it was waiting for something. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, the figure disappeared. I was alone again, but the room felt wrong, like it wasn't really empty. I stayed awake the rest of the night, too terrified to even blink. When morning came, everything seemed normal again, almost too normal. The window was still broken, but there was no blood, no sign that anyone else had been in the cabin. I checked my phone and found something that made my blood run cold. Recordings. There were several voice recordings, all from the middle of the night. I played the first one and heard my own voice, but it didn't sound like me. It was like I was talking in my sleep, saying things I didn't understand, mentioning places and names I didn't know. The last recording was the worst. It was just heavy breathing and a single sentence whispered over and over. You did it. You did it. You did it. I couldn't stay in that cabin any longer. I packed my things as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. But as I threw my bag on the bed, something slipped out and fell to the floor. It was a note, written in my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. The note said, "You did it." That was it. I had to leave. As I walked to the car, I made the mistake of looking back at the cabin. Through the broken window, I saw someone standing there watching me. I didn't stay to find out who or what it was. Now I'm back home, but the fear hasn't left me. I keep finding things I don't remember buying, and people say I've been acting strange, sending messages I don't remember writing. I'm scared to sleep because I don't know what I'll do or where I'll wake up. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see someone else looking back at me. I checked into the motel late at night. The drive had been long, and I was too tired to care about how empty and run down the place looked. The flickering neon sign outside barely lit up the parking lot, and the front desk clerk barely looked at me when I asked for a room. He handed me the key with a cold stare, muttering something about checkout time before turning back to his TV. I shrugged it off, figuring he just hated his job, and I dragged my suitcase to the room at the far end of the building. The room was as old and worn as the rest of the motel, but it was a place to sleep. That was all I needed. I threw my bag onto the bed, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed into the lumpy mattress. I was asleep almost instantly. When I woke up the next morning, I felt strange, like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and that's when I saw it. A note tucked neatly under my pillow. My heart skipped a beat. Who would leave a note under my pillow? I picked it up, my hands shaking a little as I unfolded the small piece of paper. The handwriting was messy, almost like it had been written in a hurry. The words sent a chill down my spine. You're being watched. Don't trust the motel staff. I read it again, trying to make sense of it. Watched? By who? And why shouldn't I trust the staff? My first thought was that it was some kind of prank, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. Someone had been in my room while I was sleeping. The thought made my stomach turn. I scanned the room, looking for any signs that something was out of place, but everything seemed normal. But then again, how would I even know? I didn't really pay attention to how it looked when I first got here. I couldn't stay in the room. I needed to clear my head. I left the note on the nightstand and went outside. The motel parking lot was almost empty, just a couple of cars besides mine. The same clerk was at the front desk, now staring at his phone instead of the TV. I caught his eye as I passed by, and he gave me the same cold look as before. Did he know about the note? Was he the one who put it there? My mind started racing with questions. I decided to walk to the diner down the street for breakfast. Maybe some food and fresh air would help me think straight. But even as I ate, I couldn't stop thinking about the note. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me, but every time I looked, no one was there. The paranoia started creeping in, making me second guess everything. Who could have been in my room? Was someone following me now? When I got back to the motel, the clerk was gone, replaced by an older woman. She smiled at me when I walked by, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. The note was still there on the nightstand, mocking me. I picked it up again, reading it over and over. The words seemed to blur together, but the message was clear. I wasn't safe here. I spent the rest of the day in the room, too scared to leave, but too scared to stay. Every time I heard footsteps in the hall, my heart raced. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, just other guests walking by, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right outside my door, listening, waiting. By evening, I was a nervous wreck, jumping at every sound. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I marched down to the front desk, the note clenched in my hand. The older woman was still there, and I demanded to know if anyone had been in my room. She looked at me like I was crazy, her expression calm, almost too calm. She told me no one had been in my room, that the staff didn't enter occupied rooms unless requested. Her voice was so steady, so reassuring, but it only made me more uneasy. I returned to my room, feeling more paranoid than ever. The woman's calmness was too much, like she was hiding something. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing over me, watching. The fear was overwhelming, and I barely got any rest. The next morning, I found another note, this time on the bathroom sink. It was the same handwriting, the same warning, but now it was more urgent. Leave now. They are coming for you. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words. I needed to get out of here, but where could I go? What if they were waiting for me outside? I packed my bag quickly, my hands trembling so much that I could barely zip it up. I had to leave, but I couldn't just walk out the front door. What if the staff was in on it? What if they were the ones watching me? As I reached for the door handle, I heard a noise outside. Footsteps, quiet but unmistakable. I froze, my hand hovering over the knob. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I held my breath, straining to hear anything more, but there was only silence. Then, a soft rustling sound, like paper being slid under the door. My heart raced as I bent down and picked up the piece of paper that had been pushed through the gap. My fingers fumbled to unfold it, and when I finally did, my blood ran cold. The note was different this time. The handwriting was the same, but the message was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. They're not the ones you should be afraid of. Before I could even process what that meant, I heard a soft click from the door, like someone locking it from the outside. Panic surged through me as I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, but there was none. The windows were sealed, the door wouldn't open, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. I could feel my breath quickening, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A quiet, almost imperceptible whisper coming from somewhere inside the room. I wasn't alone. I was driving late at night somewhere in the middle of nowhere. My eyes were heavy, and I knew I should have stopped earlier, but I kept telling myself that the next town was just around the corner. The road stretched on, dark and empty with no signs of life. Then, out of nowhere, my car sputtered. The gas gauge, which I could have sworn was nearly full, suddenly dropped to empty. I pulled over, confused and a little annoyed. There wasn't another car in sight. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I was stuck. Just as I was starting to panic, I saw a dim light up ahead, a motel, old and run down, but a welcome sight. With no other choice, I grabbed my bag and started walking towards it. The air was thick and heavy, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under my shoes. The motel looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Paint peeled from the walls, and the neon sign buzzed faintly. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, the smell of dampness hanging in the air. An old man sat behind the counter, staring at me with cold, lifeless eyes. "Room for the night?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in the silence. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Finally, he nodded and slid a key across the counter. I forced a smile and took it, but something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I climbed the creaky stairs to my room, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. My room was small and musty, the bed sagging in the middle. I felt uneasy, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. The walls were thin, and I could hear strange noises from the rooms next to mine, whispers, shuffling, and every so often, a creak like someone was right outside my door. I told myself it was just the old building settling, but the unease only grew. I checked the door twice to make sure it was locked, then lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. When dawn finally broke, I felt a little silly for being so paranoid. I grabbed my bag and headed back to my car, eager to leave this creepy place behind. But when I got to the car, my heart sank. The gas tank was empty again. How was that possible? I had just filled it up before I arrived here. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small scratch around the gas cap, like someone had pried it open. Someone had drained my tank. Panic set in. I ran back to the motel, demanding answers. The old man behind the counter just stared at me with those same lifeless eyes. When I asked for help, he shrugged, as if this was a regular occurrence. "Can I call for help?" I asked, but he shook his head. "No phone lines," he said, his voice flat and cold. "No signal here either." I felt trapped. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I decided to leave on foot, hoping to find help somewhere down the road. But as soon as I started walking, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced back at the motel and I saw shadows moving behind the curtains in the windows. Were they watching me? The further I walked, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. I picked up my pace, but no matter how fast I walked, the feeling wouldn't go away. The road seemed to stretch on forever, no end in sight. My legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I broke into a run. I had to get away, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right behind me. I finally stopped, gasping for breath. I looked around, and in the distance, I could see the motel again. I had somehow ended up back where I started. Desperate and out of options, I stormed back into the motel and confronted the old man. "What's going on here?" "Why can't I leave?" I demanded. The old man just stared at me, a twisted smile creeping across his face. "People who run out of gas here," he said slowly, "never leave." My stomach dropped. I realized then that this was no accident. The motel, the empty tank, the strange looks, it was all a trap. They never intended to let me go. I knew I had to escape, but I couldn't trust anyone. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me, trying to come up with a plan. I thought about stealing a car or sneaking out in the middle of the night, but every option felt hopeless. They were watching me, waiting for me to make a move. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds outside my door. Footsteps, whispers, the creak of floorboards. My heart raced, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. In the early hours of the morning, when everything was quiet, I made my move. I grabbed my bag and crept out of the room, trying to be as silent as possible. My heart pounded in my ears as I made my way to the door, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But just as I reached the door, I heard a noise behind me. I turned, and in the dim light, I saw the old man standing at the end of the hallway watching me with that same cold, lifeless stare. My blood ran cold, and I knew I had to run. I pushed the door open and ran out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I didn't look back. I just kept running, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. But as I ran, the realization hit me. I might never escape. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. The shadows followed me, always just out of reach, and in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. I was trapped, and no matter how far I ran, I would never leave. I'm not sure if I should share this, but I need to get it out. It's been bothering me since it happened. Maybe writing it down will help me understand. It's about a night that still haunts me. I've been trying to forget, but I can't. It started a few months ago when I was traveling for work. I had a long day, filled with meetings and flights. By the time I arrived at the small town where I was staying, I was exhausted. The hotel was nothing special, just a small, cheap place I found online. It was late, and I didn't care much about the details. I just wanted a bed and some sleep. The receptionist was a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, but there was something off about him. I couldn't quite place it, but he seemed almost too friendly, too eager to help. He gave me the key to room 203 and wished me a good night. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I took the key and headed to my room. The hallway was dimly lit, and everything about the place felt old. The walls were cracked, the carpet worn. But again, I was too tired to care. I tossed my bags on the bed and decided to grab a quick bite from a nearby diner. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and my stomach was growling. When I got back to the hotel, I reached into my pocket for the key, but it wasn't there. I searched every pocket, my bag, even the ground outside, but it was gone. I must have dropped it somewhere, probably at the diner. I was frustrated, but what could I do? I had to get back in somehow, so I went back to the reception desk. The same man was there, still smiling. I explained that I lost my key, and he didn't seem surprised. In fact, he barely reacted at all. He just nodded, pulled out a spare key from a drawer and handed it to me. There was something about the way he did it, though, like he'd done this before, like he was expecting it. But I pushed the thought away. I was just tired, I told myself. As I walked back to the room, I felt a strange sense of unease. The hallway seemed darker, the air heavier. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what. I just wanted to sleep. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Stale, like the room hadn't been aired out in a long time. The second thing was the state of the room. It wasn't how I left it. The bed was unmade, the covers twisted and thrown aside. There were faint stains on the carpet, dark and reddish, like old blood. My heart started pounding. Maybe housekeeping had been in, but that didn't make sense. It was late, and why would they leave the room in such a mess? Then I heard it, a faint noise, like something scratching. It was coming from the closet, a heavy old thing with a thick wooden door. I stood frozen, listening. The scratching continued, soft but persistent. My first thought was that it was a rat or some other animal. But then I heard something else. Soft whimpers, like someone crying. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was someone in the closet? Was it a prank? My hands were shaking as I moved closer to the door. I reached out to open it, but it was locked and the handle wouldn't budge. I pressed my ear against the wood, and the whimpers grew louder. I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, but just as I did, the door to the room opened behind me. I spun around, and there he was, the receptionist, standing in the doorway, his smile wider than before. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, like he was waiting for something. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. It sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back, trying to find my words. There's something in the closet," I managed to say, but he didn't seem concerned. In fact, he almost looked amused. "The key I gave you," he said slowly, "was meant for another guest." He didn't apologize, didn't offer an explanation. He just stood there, watching me with that same unsettling smile. I wanted to demand answers, to know what the hell was going on, but fear had taken over. I pushed past him, my heart racing, and ran down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby. My thoughts were a mess, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Back at the reception desk, I demanded another room. My voice was shaky, and I must have sounded crazy, but I didn't care. The receptionist didn't argue. He handed me a new key, still smiling, as if nothing was wrong. I wanted to scream at him, to make him take this seriously, but all I could do was take the key and walk away. As I headed to the new room, I heard it, a door creaking open behind me. I turned, my heart in my throat, and saw the receptionist standing at the entrance to room 203. He was watching me, that same eerie smile on his face, as if he knew something I didn't. I rushed into the new room and locked the door behind me. I sat on the bed, my mind racing, replaying everything that had happened. Every small noise in the room made me jump, every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind outside. I couldn't stop thinking about that closet, about what or who was inside. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was safe. The receptionist's smile haunted me, and the thought of what might have been in that closet kept me awake. I left the hotel as soon as daylight broke, not caring if I missed my work appointment. I don't know what happened in that room, and I'm not sure I want to know. But one thing's for sure, I'll never stay in a place like that again. I didn't think much about the place when I first arrived. It was late, and I was tired after driving for hours. The hotel was small, tucked away on a lonely stretch of road. It looked old, the kind of place that probably hadn't been updated in years. But it was quiet, and that was all I cared about. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked in. He was a thin man, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes looked too big for him, like he had lost a lot of weight quickly. He didn't smile or say much, just slid the key across the counter and told me my room was on the second floor. I climbed the stairs, feeling the wood creak under my feet. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpet old and worn. My room was at the end of the hall. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and plain, just a bed, a dresser, and a small window. There was no phone, which I thought was strange, but I shrugged it off. The window didn't open, but I figured it was for safety. I was too tired to care. I unpacked a little, took a quick shower, and decided to go out to find something to eat. But when I tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. I turned the handle harder, pushed with my shoulder, but it stayed shut. For a moment, I thought I must have locked it somehow, but the lock was on the inside and it was clearly unlocked. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone to call the front desk, but there was no signal. That was odd. There had been service outside. I moved around the room, holding my phone up to the window, trying to get a bar, but nothing worked. I took a deep breath. telling myself it was fine. I'd just stay in tonight, deal with the door in the morning. I wasn't that hungry anyway. But as I sat on the bed, the feeling of unease started to grow. The room felt too quiet, too still. I tried the door again, rattling the handle harder this time, but it still wouldn't open. Hours passed, and I tried everything I could think of. I tried forcing the door open with a chair, kicking it, even trying to remove the hinges, but nothing worked. The windows were sealed tight, no way to open them or even break them. I started to feel trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I pounded on the walls, hoping someone in the other rooms would hear me, but there was no answer. I screamed, shouted for help, but the building stayed silent. My heart was racing and sweat was dripping down my face. I couldn't breathe right. The room felt smaller, like it was pressing in on me. I tried my phone again, but the battery was almost dead and still no signal. I was starting to panic. I couldn't stay in here much longer. I had no food, no water, and the room was getting hotter by the minute. I needed to get out, but there was no way out. Night came, and with it, the darkness. The single light in the room flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. I felt like the room was alive, like it was trying to swallow me whole. I grabbed the chair again, trying to use it to break the window, but the chair just bounced off, leaving me exhausted and defeated. As I sat on the floor, gasping for breath, I started to think about the receptionist, the way he hadn't even looked at me, how he had just handed me the key without a word. It didn't make sense. The door shouldn't be stuck like this. The window shouldn't be sealed. My mind started to race, thoughts tumbling over each other, each one darker than the last. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming down the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. My heart stopped with them. I waited, barely breathing, but the door didn't open. The footsteps just stood there, waiting, listening. I whispered, "Hello? Please, can you help me? The door is stuck." But there was no reply. The footsteps didn't move. They just stayed there, like they were watching me, waiting for something. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. Should I scream again? Should I try to break the door down one more time? But something told me that wouldn't help. Whoever was on the other side didn't want to help me. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The footsteps finally moved away, fading into the distance. But the fear didn't leave with them. It settled in my chest, heavy and cold. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. My mind was racing with thoughts I didn't want to have. What if this was all planned? What if the receptionist knew the door wouldn't open? What if this was some kind of sick game? Just as the first light of dawn started to creep through the window, I heard it. The sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart leaped into my throat. Was this it? Was someone finally coming to let me out? The door creaked open, and there he was, the receptionist, standing in the doorway, his face still blank, still unreadable. Relief washed over me for a second, but then I saw his eyes, cold and empty, and a new kind of fear took hold. He didn't say anything, just stood there, blocking the way out. I realized then that I wasn't getting out of here, not unless I did something. But what could I do? I was weak, tired, and scared out of my mind. The story doesn't have a happy ending. I wish I could tell you that I escaped, that I fought back. But the truth is, I don't know what happened next. All I remember is the feeling of cold air as he stepped into the room, the door closing behind him, and then darkness. I never thought I'd be the type to believe in horror stories. Those things happen to other people, not to someone like me. I moved into a small old house a few months ago. It was cheap, quiet, and in a nice neighborhood. everything I needed after a bad breakup. But then, the noises started. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. You know how old houses can be, creaking and groaning as they shift. But it wasn't just that. The sounds were coming from above my bedroom, late at night. At first, it was faint, just a light creaking, like someone walking around. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the more I tried to sleep, the louder the noises seemed to get. One night, it got worse. I woke up to a distinct sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was slow and deliberate, not like a random creak. My heart pounded, and I tried to convince myself that it was just a rodent or something. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The next morning, I felt uneasy. I tried to focus on my work, but the noise kept playing in my head. It wasn't normal, and I knew I had to do something about it. But what could I do? It was just noise. There was no proof that something was wrong. That night, the noise came back, louder than ever. I couldn't sleep, and my fear grew with each passing hour. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was causing those sounds. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed onto a chair to look at the ceiling. That's when I noticed it, a small loose panel in the corner. My heart sank as I realized I had never noticed it before. It was too small to be a normal entrance, almost like it was hidden on purpose. With trembling hands, I pushed the panel aside, revealing a narrow, dark space. It was an attic, a cramped space I didn't even know existed. The air inside was cold and stale, and as I shone my flashlight around, I saw it. Footprints in the dust, a makeshift bed made out of old blankets, and scraps of food. Someone had been living up there, above my room, without me knowing. I nearly dropped the flashlight in fear. My mind raced with thoughts of who could be up there and why. I went to my landlord the next day, shaking as I explained what I had found. He listened, but he didn't seem concerned. He told me it was probably just my imagination, that I was stressed out from the move and everything else. But I knew what I saw, and his dismissive attitude only made me feel more isolated, more vulnerable. I tried to convince myself that he was right, that maybe I was overreacting, but the noises continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every creak, every thud made my skin crawl. I started to dread nighttime, knowing that I would have to face those sounds again, alone. One night it got even worse. The noises were louder, more deliberate, like someone was moving around right above me. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a kitchen knife and decided to confront whatever, or whoever, was up there. I was terrified, but I had to know. I couldn't live like this anymore. I climbed back up to the attic entrance, heart pounding in my chest. The space was more disturbed than before. Blankets were scattered, and there was a fresh, wet smell like someone had been sweating up there, but it was empty. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a soft, slow breathing coming from the shadows. My blood ran cold. I could feel eyes on me, but I couldn't see anyone. Panic took over, and I rushed down the ladder, nearly falling in my haste. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. When the police arrived, they searched the house. They found nothing. The attic was empty, and there was no sign of anyone living there. But they did find something else, a hidden crawl space that led to the neighboring house. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been slipping in and out of my house through that crawl space, living above me without my knowledge. The police told me that the previous tenant had reported similar disturbances before she left suddenly. They said it was probably just a squatter, someone trying to find a place to stay. But their words didn't comfort me. The idea that someone had been living up there, watching me while I slept, was too much to handle. I decided to move out the next day. I couldn't stay in that house, not after everything that happened. But as I packed my things, I heard it again. A soft creaking sound, this time coming from inside my bedroom closet. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I should open the closet, check to see if anyone was there, but I couldn't move. The fear was paralyzing. I just stood there, staring at the closet door, waiting for it to open. It never did. But I knew, deep down, that whoever or whatever had been living in the attic wasn't gone. They were still there, watching, waiting. And as I left the house for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never truly be free of them. I'm not sure why I ended up at that motel. It was late, and I was tired. Too tired to keep driving. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and when I saw the sign for a motel, I took the exit without thinking twice. The place was small and isolated, tucked away from the main road, and looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. But it was functional. That's all I cared about. When I walked in, I felt a weird chill, like the air was too still. The lobby was empty except for a receptionist behind the desk. She smiled at me, and I was relieved. I don't know why, but her smile put me at ease. She looked normal, friendly even. I remember her face clearly, bright eyes, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. I didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. We didn't talk much. Just the usual small talk, how far I'd driven, how long I planned to stay. She handed me the key to a room on the first floor, room 8. I remember thinking it was strange that the motel had so many rooms for such a small place. The room was old but clean enough. I was too tired to care about the faded wallpaper or the flickering light in the bathroom. I just wanted to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. It started with noises. At first, I thought I was imagining them. Soft footsteps outside my door, faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. The walls were thin, so I told myself it was probably just other guests. But the motel seemed empty when I checked in. The parking lot was nearly deserted except for my car and an old rusted truck. I tried to ignore it, but the noises didn't stop. Then, there was a distant banging, like someone was hitting the walls in a room far away. It echoed through the halls, growing louder and then fading into nothing. I got up a couple of times, thinking maybe I should check it out, but each time I was too exhausted to move. I stayed in bed, telling myself it was nothing, just my tired mind playing tricks on me. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When I saw the first light through the thin curtains, I decided to leave early. I didn't care about breakfast or checking out properly. I just wanted to get back on the road and forget about the strange night. But I had to return the key, so I went back to the lobby. The receptionist was there again, sitting in the same spot, but something was different. Her smile wasn't as warm as it was the night before. Her eyes seemed colder, almost empty. I handed her the key and she took it without a word. I remember her fingers brushing mine, cold, like she'd been standing outside in the chill. She didn't say anything as I left, and I didn't look back. I drove for a while before stopping at a gas station to fill up and get some coffee. The gas station was small, just like the motel, but it felt more real, more alive. The cashier was friendly, making small talk as he rang up my coffee. I mentioned the motel to him, asking if he knew anything about it. His face changed, his smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion, then something darker. "That place?" he asked, his voice low. "You stayed there last night?" I nodded, feeling a sudden unease. "That motel's been closed for years. There was an accident, a fire, I think. Nobody's supposed to be there." My heart dropped. I felt cold all over, like ice was spreading through my veins. I told him that wasn't possible, that I checked in, spoke to the receptionist, stayed in room 8. The cashier just shook his head, looking at me like I was crazy. He didn't say anything else, just watched as I stumbled out of the store and back to my car. I should have kept driving, left the whole thing behind, but I couldn't. I had to go back. I had to see for myself. When I pulled up to the motel again, it didn't look the same. The place was completely abandoned, just like the cashier said. The sign was cracked, half the letters missing, and the windows were dirty, some of them broken. I walked into the lobby, my heart pounding in my chest. It was dark inside, and dust covered everything: the floor, the desk, the old couch in the corner. There was no sign of anyone, no light, no warmth. I approached the front desk, feeling like I was in a nightmare. The key I returned was there, sitting on the counter, covered in dust like it had been there for years. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was the same key, room 8, the one the receptionist had given me. But there was no way it could be here, untouched, like I'd never been there. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, pinned to the wall behind the desk. The headline was blurred, but I could make out a few words. Fire, tragic accident, receptionist killed. And then I saw her face, the same face that had smiled at me the night before, the same eyes, the same neat bun. My stomach turned and I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled back, dropping the key on the floor, and ran out of there as fast as I could. I don't know if what I saw was real. I don't know if I was just tired, if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I can't get her face out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. I hear those noises again, the whispers, the banging. I haven't slept properly since that night. I can't. I keep telling myself it wasn't real, that I imagined it all. But then I remember the feel of that cold key in my hand, and I'm not so sure. I travel a lot for work, staying in cheap motels because I'm not a fan of spending too much on a room where I'll just sleep. Most of these places are clean enough, and I've never had any problems before. But after what happened last week, I don't think I'll ever feel safe in a motel again. It was a Tuesday night. I had just finished a long day of meetings and was ready to crash. The motel I picked was nothing special, just another nameless place off the highway. The room was basic, with an old TV, a small bathroom, and a bed that was a bit too firm. I didn't care though. I just needed to sleep. After watching TV for a bit, I turned off the lights around midnight. It took me a while to fall asleep, my mind still buzzing from the day's work. But eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. I woke up suddenly. The room was dark, the only light coming from the red numbers on the clock beside the bed. 3:15 a.m. The air conditioner hummed quietly, but something else was off. It felt like someone was watching me. At first, I thought I was imagining things, just a bad dream or something. But when I turned my head towards the foot of the bed, my heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing there. The room was too dark to make out his face, but I could see his outline. He was just standing there, still as a statue, staring at me. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Was I still dreaming? No, this was real. Too real. What are you doing? I managed to stammer out. My voice sounded weak, even to me. The man didn't move for a second. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "I must have the wrong room." That's it. No apology, no explanation, just that. Then he turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just lay there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. After a few minutes that felt like hours, I finally forced myself to move. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door. It was locked, deadbolt and all. How did he get in? And more importantly, How did he get out? I checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing. No sign of anyone. The window was closed, the lock still in place. I was alone again, but the fear wouldn't leave me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat on the bed, my back against the headboard, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The night dragged on, every minute feeling like an eternity. When the first light of morning finally crept through the curtains, I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe it had been a dream, a really vivid nightmare brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. It was too real. I got up, trying to shake off the unease that still clung to me. I decided to get ready and leave as soon as possible. I just wanted to be out of that room, out of that motel. But as I was packing my bag, something caught my eye. Something that shouldn't have been there. On the nightstand, next to the clock, was a small keychain. It wasn't mine. It had a little plastic tag with the number 12 on it. That wasn't my room number. My room was 15. I stared at it, my mind racing again. Had the man dropped it? Was he staying in room 12? But if that was the case, why was he in my room? I grabbed the keychain and went to the front desk. The receptionist was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd been working there for years. I handed her the keychain and asked if she knew who it belonged to. She looked at it and frowned. "This is for one of our rooms, but we don't give out these keychains anymore. Haven't for years. You said you found this in your room?" I nodded, my heart sinking. This didn't make any sense. The woman shrugged, clearly not interested in helping. "Must be a mix-up. I'll take care of it." I wanted to ask more, but her tone made it clear the conversation was over. I went back to my room feeling more unsettled than ever. Something was very wrong with this place, and I needed to leave. I packed up the rest of my things in record time and checked out. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man standing in the road, watching me leave. But there was nothing. I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind, telling myself it was just some weird misunderstanding, that maybe I was overreacting. But as I got on the highway, my phone buzzed with a new message. I almost didn't check it, thinking it was just another work email, but something told me to look. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "See you next time." I nearly swerved off the road when I saw it. My hands shook as I tried to think, but nothing made sense. How did they get my number? And who was this person? My mind kept going back to the man in my room, his calm voice saying he had the wrong room. But he knew. He knew exactly where he was. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see the man standing at the foot of my bed, his face hidden in the shadows. I don't know who he is or what he wants, but I'm afraid that one day he'll find me again, and next time I might not be so lucky. I needed a break, so I booked a weekend at a small hotel far from the city. It was a quiet place, perfect for someone like me who needed some peace. The hotel wasn't big, only a few rooms, and the staff were friendly enough, though they didn't talk much. I arrived late in the afternoon, checked in, and after a quick look around decided to have dinner in the small dining room. I was the only one there at first, but soon another guest came in. She looked to be about my age, maybe a bit older. She had a friendly smile and we started talking. Her name was Emily, and she was also there to get away from the noise of the city. We talked about our jobs, life in the city, and how nice it was to escape for a while. She seemed easy to talk to, and before I knew it, hours had passed. We finished dinner and continued our conversation in the lounge area, sharing more stories about our lives. By the end of the night, I felt like I'd made a friend, someone I could relax and talk to during my stay. The next morning, I went down for breakfast, expecting to see Emily there, but she wasn't. I waited for a while, thinking maybe she was just running late, but she never showed up. After breakfast, I went to the front desk to ask about her, thinking maybe she had decided to go out for the day. "Excuse me, have you seen Emily?" "The guest I was talking to last night?" I asked the receptionist. She looked at me with a blank expression. "Emily? I'm sorry, I don't know who you mean." I was confused. "The woman who checked in yesterday, same as me. We had dinner together." The receptionist shook her head slowly. "There was no other guest who checked in yesterday, sir. You're the only guest staying here right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But I talked to her last night. We spent hours together." "I'm sorry, but there's no record of anyone else checking in." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I went up to Emily's room, the one she had told me she was staying in. The door was unlocked, and when I opened it, the room was empty. No bags, no clothes, nothing. It was like no one had ever been there. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. I stood there, staring at the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? I went back to my room and sat on the bed, trying to remember everything from the night before. It had felt so real, but now I wasn't sure. I couldn't just let it go. I went back to the front desk and asked to see the night manager, the person who had been working when I checked in. Maybe they had seen something. But when the night manager came, they had the same answer as the receptionist. No one else had checked in. No one else had been in the dining room last night. It didn't make any sense. I was sure that I had met Emily, sure that she had been there. I felt a growing sense of panic, like something was slipping away from me, something important. Determined to find some proof, I went back to the lounge where we had talked. I searched around, looking for anything that might show she had been there. Then, under one of the chairs, I found it. A small earring, one that I remembered Emily wearing. I picked it up and took it to the front desk. "Look, this is hers." "She was here," I insisted, showing the earring to the receptionist. She glanced at it and shrugged. "People lose things all the time. Could be from anyone." "No, it's hers," I said, my voice shaking. "She was here last night." The receptionist just gave me a polite smile, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Or maybe she didn't care. I didn't know what to do. Everything felt wrong, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what was going on. I went through the hotel's guest book, looking for any sign of Emily's name, but it wasn't there. I asked other staff members, but they all said the same thing. No one else had checked in. No one knew anything about her. That night, as I sat in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I thought about leaving, but something held me back. I felt like I needed to know the truth, even if it scared me. Then, just before I decided to go to bed, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in shaky handwriting, barely legible. "Leave now. They're watching." My heart pounded in my chest. I looked around, half expecting someone to be there, but the hallway was empty. I didn't know what to think, but I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I grabbed my things and left the hotel as fast as I could. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about what had happened. Had she ever existed? Or was she just a figment of my imagination, a trick of my mind? And who had left that note? The questions kept me up all night, long after I had left that place behind. Even now, I can't get rid of the feeling that I'm being watched, that somehow I'm still connected to that hotel, to whatever secret it's hiding. I don't know if I'll ever find out the truth, and maybe it's better that way. But one thing is for sure, I'll never go back there again. I work the night shift at an office building downtown. It's a pretty uneventful job. The building is mostly empty, just a few of us here to keep things running until the morning crew arrives. It's quiet, too quiet sometimes, but I've gotten used to it. I even find it kind of peaceful. That is, until last night. It started like any other shift. I was at my desk, going through some emails, half watching the clock as I waited for my break. The building was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Then, without warning, the fire alarm went off. It was loud and sudden, shattering the stillness. I froze for a second, thinking it might be a drill. But there hadn't been any notice about one. The alarm kept blaring, and I started to get uneasy. No smoke, no smell of fire, but the alarm kept screaming. I looked around, expecting to see someone else reacting, but I was alone. That's when I decided to take the nearest emergency exit. I thought it would be the fastest way out. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door marked with the bright red exit sign. I pushed it open, expecting to see the familiar stairwell. But what I found was a narrow, dimly lit tunnel stretching out in front of me, leading underground. I stood there for a moment, confused. I'd never seen this tunnel before. I'd worked here for months, and I was sure I knew the layout of the building. But the alarm was still going, and I couldn't just stand there. The tunnel was cold, the air damp, but I thought it might be a new route added recently, maybe something I just hadn't noticed before. I stepped inside, hoping it would lead to safety. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, the walls seemed to close in on me. The further I went, the colder it got. My footsteps echoed around me, the sound bouncing off the narrow walls. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in my stomach. I just needed to find the way out. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like something moving behind me. I stopped and listened, my heart pounding. There it was again. A shuffling noise, almost too quiet to hear, but definitely there. Panic started to creep in. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the end of the tunnel soon, but it just seemed to go on and on. The tunnel walls were lined with strange markings, symbols that didn't make any sense. Old emergency signs, their paint peeling and faded, were scattered along the walls. I passed by items left behind by others. An old shoe, a torn piece of clothing. They looked like they had been there for years. My breath caught in my throat. Who else had been down here? And why hadn't they come back? The noise behind me was getting louder, closer. I broke into a run, the tunnel twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I felt like I was running in circles, the cold air biting at my skin. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I needed to get out of there. I stumbled into a small room off the tunnel, the door hanging loosely from its hinges. Inside, it was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the ceiling. The room was filled with old office furniture, dusty and broken. Papers were scattered across the floor, mixed with abandoned personal items. A wallet, a broken watch, a photograph. There were signs of a struggle, overturned chairs, and deep scratches on the walls. I was terrified now. This place wasn't just a part of the building. It was something else, something wrong. The sound of footsteps echoed down the tunnel, growing louder, closer. I had to hide. I crouched behind a broken desk, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and I held my breath, waiting. The door creaked open, and I saw a shadow fall across the floor. A figure stepped into the room, moving slowly, cautiously. It was a man, his clothes torn and dirty, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His eyes were wide with fear as he scanned the room. He spoke, his voice shaky and hoarse. "You can't stop. You have to keep moving. It's the only way out." I didn't move, didn't breathe. I wasn't sure if I could trust him, but the terror in his voice was real. He started to leave, but then he froze, his eyes locking onto something in the shadows. "They're coming," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "You have to run." He bolted out of the room, and I heard his footsteps fading down the tunnel. I wanted to follow, but I was paralyzed with fear. Then I heard it, a low guttural sound from the shadows, something that wasn't human. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, back into the tunnel, away from whatever was in that room. The walls seemed to close in even tighter, the air colder and harder to breathe. The tunnel twisted and turned, and I kept running, praying for an exit. Finally, I saw it. A door at the end of the tunnel. I threw myself against it, pushing it open with all my strength. I stumbled through and fell to the floor, gasping for air. When I looked up, I was back in the office building. The fire alarm was still blaring, the lights flickering. Everything was just as I had left it, but nothing felt right. I tried to catch my breath, my mind racing. How had I ended up back here? Was it all in my head? But as I stood up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The emergency exit door was still open, the tunnel behind it dark and silent. I realized with a sinking feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. There was no way out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to get this out. It's like a weight in my chest that I can't shake. I think maybe if I tell someone, I can stop thinking about it. So here goes. It was late, way too late to be driving, but I didn't have a choice. I had to be at my destination by morning, and I was already behind schedule. My eyes were heavy, the road ahead blurry with darkness and my own exhaustion. When I saw the small flickering neon sign for the motel, it felt like a miracle. A place to rest, if only for a few hours. The motel was off the main highway, tucked behind a cluster of trees. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars lined up near the front entrance. I parked, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the kind of place that smells faintly of old carpet and cleaning products. Behind the counter, the receptionist smiled at me, a little too cheerfully for that hour of the night. "Checking in?" she asked, her voice too bright. "Yeah, just for the night," I replied, my own voice thick with tiredness. The check-in process was quick. I barely registered her words as she handed me the key, her smile never fading. I took the key and headed to my room. The hallway was narrow, the carpet worn, but all I could think about was sleep. The room itself was unremarkable. A bed, a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years, and an old armchair in the corner. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed without even undressing. But sleep didn't come as easily as I'd hoped. The walls seemed too thin, like they were made of paper. I could hear noises, faint but persistent, scratching, whispering. I told myself it was just the old building settling, but it kept me on edge. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, it was early morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, but there was enough light to see the outlines of the furniture in the room. I felt groggy, disoriented. The noises from the night before still echoed in my mind, but I shook them off. I needed to get back on the road. I grabbed my bag and headed out. The motel was quiet, almost too quiet, like the place was holding its breath. I made my way to the parking lot, tossed my bag into the car, and started the engine. As I drove toward the exit, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I was escaping something I hadn't fully realized was a threat. But then it happened. As I turned onto the road, I blinked, and suddenly, I was back at the front of the motel. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't missed the exit. I was sure of it. Confused, I parked and went back inside. The lobby looked the same as it had the night before, but there was a different receptionist behind the counter now. She smiled at me, the same unnerving smile as the first woman, but there was no recognition in her eyes. "Checking out?" she asked, as if she'd never seen me before. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I just checked out," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I was trying to leave, but I ended up back here." She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "That's strange. Maybe you just took a wrong turn." I knew I hadn't, but what could I say? I just nodded and left, determined to try again. But it happened again, and again. Each time, no matter which way I turned, I ended up back at the motel, standing in front of that damn desk with a different receptionist staring at me like I was some kind of idiot. The third time it happened, I started to panic. My breathing was shallow, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I felt like I was losing my mind. I marched back into the lobby, demanding answers. "Why can't I leave?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty space. "What's going on here?" The receptionist, another new face, looked at me calmly, her expression almost pitying. "You're free to go whenever you like," she said, her voice soft, almost soothing. "Just take the exit." But I knew it wasn't that simple. I had tried every way I could think of, and each time I was pulled back to this place like a magnet. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. Time lost its meaning. I don't know how long I kept trying, how many times I ended up back in that same spot. The receptionists all blurred together, their faces different but their words the same, repeating like a broken record. At some point, I stopped trying. I sat down in one of the old armchairs in the lobby, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. I realized then that something was very wrong, but I didn't have the energy to care anymore. I was too tired, too worn out by the endless loop I couldn't escape. That's when I noticed it, a small detail I hadn't seen before. My watch, the one I always wore, was wrong. The date on it was days ahead, maybe even weeks. I couldn't remember how long I had been there, how many times I had tried to leave. It all blurred together, one long, continuous nightmare. I looked up at the receptionist, the same one who had checked me in, though I couldn't be sure anymore. She smiled at me, her eyes cold and distant, like she knew something I didn't. "Are you ready to check out now?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just sat there, staring at the door, knowing that if I tried to leave, I'd end up right back where I started. I'm still here, sitting in this lobby, watching the cars pull into the lot and leave again. I don't try to leave anymore. There's no point. I don't know what's real or what's just in my head, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never getting out of here. If you're reading this, don't stop at strange motels. Keep driving no matter how tired you are, because once you check in, you might never check out. I decided to get away for the weekend. Life had been rough lately. Work stress, a breakup, just everything piling up. So when I found this guest house online, promising peace and quiet, it felt like the perfect escape. The place was old, with creaky floors and walls that seemed to whisper, but the owner, an older woman with a warm smile, made me feel welcome. She showed me to my room, and I remember thinking how cozy it was, despite the house's strange vibe. That night, I was lying in bed, finally relaxing, when I heard it. A faint sound, like a child crying. At first, I thought it was just my tired mind playing tricks, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. It was definitely a child, and it was coming from the vent near the bed. I sat up, confused. Why would there be a child crying in the middle of the night? I tried to ignore it, but the crying wouldn't stop. It was soft, almost like the child didn't want to be heard but couldn't help it. It made my skin crawl. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and pressed my ear against the vent, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound echoed through the vent, but I couldn't tell where it was leading. The next morning, over breakfast, I casually asked the owner if there were any children staying at the guest house. She looked at me, surprised, and shook her head. "No children here, just you and another guest down the hall." Her answer didn't sit well with me, but I didn't push it. Maybe it was just a TV from the other guest's room, I told myself, trying to brush off the unease. That night, though, the crying started again. Louder this time, more desperate. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore it, but the sound was like nails on a chalkboard, impossible to block out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I decided to figure out where the crying was coming from. I grabbed my phone for light and stepped out into the dark hallway. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, except for that damn crying. I followed the sound, trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I checked the rooms nearby, but they were all empty. It was like the sound was coming from the walls themselves. As I passed by a locked door at the end of the hall, I felt a cold draft. It was strange because there were no windows nearby. The crying was louder here, almost directly below me. Something made me stop and look closer. I noticed a worn rug in front of the door, edges slightly lifted. Kneeling down, I pulled the rug aside, revealing a small trapdoor beneath it. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but I couldn't. The crying was so close now, it felt like it was right under my feet. I unlocked the door, which led into a small storage room, dusty and filled with old furniture. But the draft was stronger here. Pushing aside a heavy cabinet, I found the trap door, hidden beneath layers of dust and grime. With a deep breath, I opened it. The smell hit me first, damp, musty air, mixed with something else, something foul. I used my phone's flashlight to peer down the narrow stairs leading into the basement. The crying was clear now, echoing up from the dark. I descended the stairs, my hands shaking. The light from my phone barely cut through the darkness, but enough to see what was down there. Cells. Actual cells, like something out of a nightmare. In them were people, thin, pale, eyes wide with fear. And in one corner, huddled against the wall, was a child, the source of the crying. My heart stopped. What the hell was this place? Who could do something like this? I moved closer, trying to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The child looked up at me, tears streaming down their face, too scared to even cry out for help anymore. I needed to get out of there, to find help. But as I turned, I heard it. Footsteps above, slow and deliberate, coming closer to the trap door. My blood ran cold. Whoever did this was coming back. I had to move fast. I tried to open the cells, but they were locked tight. My hands were sweating, slipping as I fumbled with the rusted locks. The footsteps were louder now, almost at the door. Panic surged through me. I couldn't save them. Not like this. Without thinking, I bolted up the stairs, leaving the captives behind. My legs felt heavy, the stairs steeper than before, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I slammed the trapdoor shut behind me and shoved the cabinet back into place. The footsteps were right outside the room now. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran down the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet, and burst out of the guest house into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Hands shaking, I fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine and speeding away, not daring to look back. Even now, I can't shake the image of those terrified faces in the basement. I should have done more, should have found a way to help them. But I was too scared. I don't know what happened after I left. but I can't stop thinking about the footsteps that were getting closer, about the people I left behind. I keep hearing that crying, even when I'm awake. I've traveled a lot in my life, mostly for work. I'm used to staying in hotels, motels, and inns. You get used to the routine after a while. The unfamiliar rooms, the different smells, the strange beds. But something about this particular inn felt off from the moment I arrived. It was a small, secluded place, tucked away near a dense forest. The kind of place where people go to get away from the world. I needed the break, or at least, that's what I told myself when I booked the room. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as I checked in. The receptionist, an older woman with a blank expression, handed me the key without saying much. I forced a smile and tried to shake off the unease that had settled in my stomach. My room was simple, just a bed, a small table, and a single window that looked out into the forest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. I unpacked my things and sat on the bed, trying to relax. But the stillness in the air was heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As night fell, I started hearing noises. At first, it was just a faint scratching, like something brushing against the walls. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old building settling or the wind outside. But the noises didn't stop. They grew louder, more distinct, and seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the room. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a mouse or the pipes, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. It made my skin crawl. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked around, trying to find the source. The closet was empty, the bathroom too. I even checked behind the curtains, but nothing was there. The room seemed normal, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The scratching sound started again, louder this time, and it seemed to be coming from under the bed. My heart began to race. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't just ignore it. Slowly, I got down on my knees and peered under the bed. At first, I didn't see anything, just the empty space. But then my eyes caught something, an envelope, lying right in the center. It was a plain white envelope, unmarked, except for one thing: my name, written neatly on the front in black ink. I froze. My name, on an envelope, under my bed. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but my mind was blank. Slowly, I reached out and picked it up. The paper felt cold in my hands. I was shaking as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, sleeping, in this very bed. The photo was recent. I could tell by the clothes I was wearing, the same ones I'd just put on that evening. The angle of the shot was strange, like it had been taken from a low perspective, maybe from the floor or just under the bed. My blood ran cold as I realized what that meant. Someone had been in my room watching me, close enough to take a picture while I slept. My hands were trembling as I dropped the photo. I stood up, backing away from the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic surged through me. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. But now, I wasn't so sure. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my phone, but my fingers were shaking too much to dial. I looked around the room again, searching for any sign of an intruder. The door was still locked from the inside. The window hadn't been opened, but someone had been in here, recently. I started tearing the room apart, pulling open drawers, throwing open the closet, checking under the bed again. There was nothing, no one. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. It felt like eyes were on me, watching my every move. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see a face staring back at me from the darkness outside, but there was only the night, silent and still. I couldn't stay there. I knew that much. I stuffed my things back into my bag, my mind racing. But as I reached for the door, I hesitated. What if they were still out there? What if they were waiting for me to leave? My hand hovered over the doorknob, uncertainty paralyzing me. I listened, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own breathing, but the room was silent, too silent. Suddenly, there was a noise behind me, a faint creak, like a floorboard shifting. My heart stopped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I could feel something, someone standing right behind me. The air felt colder, heavy with a presence I couldn't see but knew was there. The photo flashed in my mind again, that image of me sleeping, vulnerable, unaware of the eyes watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The noise stopped, the room fell back into silence, and when I finally found the courage to turn around, there was no one there. But I knew deep down that I wasn't alone. Not really. And that's the worst part. Knowing that someone, somewhere, is watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I left the inn as soon as the sun came up, my bags half packed, my nerves frayed. I never looked back. But the memory of that night, the sound of that creaking floorboard, the feel of cold air on my neck, it never left me. Even now, when I'm alone in bed, I sometimes think I hear something. A faint noise like scratching, just at the edge of hearing. And I wonder if they ever really left, or if they're still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. I've always hated driving at night. There's something about the darkness that makes everything seem farther away and much lonelier. But that night, I was too tired to care. I had been on the road for hours, heading to a small town where I planned to stay the night. The highway was empty, just a long stretch of asphalt surrounded by shadows. My eyes were heavy, but I was too close to stop. Then I saw him. A figure standing by the side of the road, just barely visible in the dim headlights. My first thought was to keep driving. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, and picking up strangers in the middle of the night is never a good idea. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was standing, slouched and defeated, like he had been there for hours. Or maybe it was the loneliness I felt, a need for some kind of company, even if it was just for a few miles. I pulled over and rolled down the window. He stepped closer, and I could see him better now. His clothes were old, worn out, and he was carrying a small battered bag. His face was thin, almost gaunt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I asked where he was going, and he mumbled something about a motel up ahead. His voice was low, almost a whisper, like he didn't want to be heard. I should have driven away, but instead I unlocked the door and told him to get in. He didn't say much after that. I tried to make small talk, asking him where he was from, but he just gave vague answers or stayed silent. There was something unsettling about him, something that made my skin crawl. But I told myself it was just my imagination, just the tiredness making me paranoid. The road stretched on, and the silence between us grew thicker, more oppressive. Finally, we reached the motel. It was the kind of place you only stop at when you have no other choice. Old, run down, with flickering neon lights that barely lit up the parking lot. I pulled up in front, and the hitchhiker got out without a word. He didn't say thank you or goodbye, just grabbed his bag and walked toward the entrance. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of relief, like I had just escaped something dangerous. But then something stopped me from driving away. I don't know why, but I sat there for a moment, staring at the spot where he had disappeared. The feeling of unease that had been nagging at me since I picked him up was still there, stronger now, like a knot in my stomach. But I shook it off, and finally drove to a different motel a few miles down the road. I just wanted to sleep. When I checked in, The old man at the desk barely looked up from his newspaper. I got my key, went to my room, and dropped my bags on the bed. But as soon as I did, I realized I had left my phone in the car. I cursed under my breath and went back outside. That's when I saw it. His bag. The small battered bag he had carried with him was sitting in the passenger seat, along with an old torn jacket. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there, staring at the items, trying to make sense of it. How could they be here? He had taken his bag when he got out. I was sure of it. But there it was, like he had never left. Panic started to set in. I looked around, half expecting to see him standing somewhere in the shadows, watching me. But the parking lot was empty, just as it had been when I arrived. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was going on. Did I imagine him getting out? Was he still in the car somehow? I opened the back seat, checked every inch of the car, but it was empty. I took the bag and jacket inside with me, feeling like I was losing my mind. In the light of the motel room, they looked even older, more worn. I sat on the bed, staring at them, trying to remember every detail of our encounter. But the more I thought about it, the more uncertain I became. His face, his voice, everything about him started to blur in my memory, like a dream that fades the moment you wake up. I tried calling the motel where I dropped him off. Maybe they could tell me if he was still there, if he had forgotten his things. But when I finally got through to the front desk, the woman on the other end told me there was no one there fitting his description. No one had checked in that night. I hung up, feeling the room close in around me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I left the motel as soon as the sun came up. The bag and jacket were still in my car, a constant reminder of the strange night before. I thought about leaving them behind, but something stopped me. Instead, I threw them in the trunk and drove off, hoping the daylight would clear my head. But it didn't. I kept thinking about him, about what happened, replaying it over and over in my mind. And the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Was he even real? Did I imagine the whole thing? I don't know. All I know is that those few hours on that lonely highway changed something in me. I can't stop thinking about him, about the bag and the jacket that never should have been there. I still have them, hidden away in the back of my closet. I don't know why I keep them. Maybe I'm waiting for an answer, some kind of explanation that will make it all make sense. But deep down, I know I'll never get one. Some things just don't have answers. Some things are better left alone. But the road isn't. Every time I drive at night now, I feel like I'm back on that highway, waiting to see him again. And sometimes, I think I do. Just a shadow in the corner of my eye, a figure standing by the side of the road, waiting. But when I look, there's nothing there, just the darkness, and the feeling that I'll never really be alone again. I've never been the type to scare easily. I've traveled alone, slept in all kinds of strange places, but nothing prepared me for that night in the cabin. I was driving through the mountains, trying to get to the next town before nightfall, but the winding roads and fading light forced me to stop. I was tired, my eyes barely staying open. That's when I saw it, a small rundown cabin just off the road. It didn't look like much, but it was shelter, and I figured I could crash there for the night. The door was unlocked, creaking loudly as I pushed it open. The place smelled of damp wood and dust. It was dark inside, but with my phone's flashlight, I could see a single room with a dusty bed and a small table. It wasn't much, but it would do. I locked the door behind me and set my bag down. The silence was almost suffocating. No hum of city life, no distant cars, just the quiet of the woods pressing in on me. I lay down on the bed, feeling the old springs dig into my back. My mind wouldn't stop thinking about how alone I was. The woods felt like they were closing in. the dark outside like a wall. I tried to convince myself it was just tiredness making me feel this way. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come fast. But then, I heard it, a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was firm, like someone wanted to get in. My eyes snapped open and my heart raced. I stared at the door, expecting to see the handle turn, but nothing happened. Just silence. I thought maybe it was the wind, or maybe a branch hit the door. I waited, holding my breath, but no other sounds followed. Slowly, my heartbeat calmed down. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was nothing, just the wind, maybe a loose shutter. But even as I tried to relax, the unease lingered. After a few minutes, I got up to check the door. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. What was I expecting to find? Probably nothing. But I had to check, if only to ease my mind. I opened the door, just a crack, and peered outside. There was no one there. The night was still. Too still. No wind, no animals, just the heavy silence. I almost laughed at myself for getting so worked up over nothing. I shut the door, making sure to lock it again, and went back to the bed. But as I settled in, I heard something else. A sound from inside the cabin. It was faint at first. A soft, muffled noise coming from the other side of the room. My ears strained to make it out, but it was just too quiet. Maybe it was the house settling, I thought. Old places make noises. Or maybe there was an animal stuck in the walls. I tried to ignore it, but the sound persisted, growing louder, more distinct. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It sounded like someone was in pain, trying to scream but being held back. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't alone. I sat up, my mind racing. Who could it be? Was someone hiding in here with me? My eyes scanned the room, landing on a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden in the shadows. The sound seemed to be coming from there. I debated with myself, weighing the options. I could leave now, run out to my car and drive away. But what if there was someone behind that door? Someone who needed help? But what if it was something worse? Something I wasn't ready to face? My hands were shaking as I stood up. I forced myself to move, inching towards the door. Each step felt like an eternity. The sound grew louder, more desperate. My breath caught in my throat as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold wooden door. I pushed it open. The noise stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. My flashlight swept the room, revealing nothing. It was empty. Just an old storage room, cluttered with junk. But something felt off. The air was thick with a smell I couldn't quite place, something rotten, like old meat. My stomach turned and I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when I saw them, scratches on the floor, faint but there, like someone had been dragged. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to get out, to leave before it was too late. I didn't even notice at first, the soft knocking starting again. But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the cabin, somewhere in the walls, echoing around me. My heart pounded in my chest as the knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever it was, it wanted out, wanted me. I ran for the door, fumbling with the lock. My hands were slippery with sweat. The door seemed stuck, like it didn't want to open. The knocking was right behind me now, like it was closing in. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran to my car, jumped in, and sped down the road, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that cabin. My hands were trembling, my mind racing. What the hell had just happened? As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. But there was nothing. The road was empty, the cabin fading into the darkness behind me. I don't know what was in that cabin, what was knocking inside those walls. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was something real, something I'll never understand. All I know is I'll never go back. The last room. I was tired, more tired than I've ever been. It had been hours since I'd seen another car, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. When I finally saw the dim, flickering sign of a motel ahead, I felt relief wash over me. There were no other options out here in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't in any state to keep driving. I pulled into the empty parking lot, my car's engine the only sound breaking the silence of the night. The motel looked old, like it hadn't seen a proper guest in years. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the neon sign that read "Vacancy" buzzed faintly. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about just sleeping in my car, but the promise of a bed was too tempting. I walked into the small, dusty office where the owner, a man in his late 50s with a crooked smile, was sitting behind the counter. He looked up at me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Just need a room for the night," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond right away, just stared at me for a moment too long. Then he nodded slowly and handed me a key. "Last one available," he said. "We don't usually use that room, but it's clean and comfortable." I took the key, feeling a little uneasy about the way he said "usually," but I was too exhausted to care. I just wanted to sleep. The room was at the far end of the motel, away from the office. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The moment I stepped inside, a strange smell hit me. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there, like something old and forgotten. The carpet had dark stains in a few places, and the wallpaper was peeling at the corners. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I told myself it was just an old, cheap motel. Nothing to worry about. I dropped my bag on the bed, which sagged under the weight. It was too quiet in the room. Usually, you can hear something, even in the middle of nowhere. A car passing by, the hum of the air conditioner, something. But here, there was nothing. The silence was thick, like the room was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it clung to me, making my skin prickle. As I started to get ready for bed, I heard it. A faint scratching sound. It was coming from somewhere in the room. I froze, listening closely. It seemed to be coming from under the bed, or maybe inside the walls. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just rats or some other small animal. But the sound continued, growing louder and more insistent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I crouched down, looking under the bed, but there was nothing there except dust. Still, the sound persisted, now seeming to come from all around me. My heart began to race. Something wasn't right. I looked around the room again, more carefully this time, and noticed something I hadn't seen before. Small black dots in the corners of the ceiling. Cameras. Hidden, but not well enough. Panic started to set in. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. And then I saw them. Scratches on the walls, long and deep, as if someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces started to fit together in my mind. This room wasn't just old and dirty. It was wrong. Something terrible had happened here, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I had to get out. I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I pulled, it stayed shut, like it was locked from the outside. Panic turned to terror as I realized I was trapped. And then, as if on cue, the door creaked open. The owner was standing there, his crooked smile wider now, almost unnatural. "I see you found my little secret," he said, his voice calm, too calm. "You're not the first, you know. This room, it's special. It's where I keep those who stay too long." My mind was spinning. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The room suddenly felt much smaller, the walls closing in on me. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him, and I saw something in his hand. A small, sharp blade, glinting in the dim light. Desperation took over. I lunged at him, trying to knock the knife from his hand. We struggled, the room spinning around us. I felt the blade slice across my arm, pain shooting through me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to survive. Somehow I managed to get the upper hand, shoving him back into the wall. He hit the floor hard, the knife clattering away. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I grabbed the knife and ran, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But when I burst out of the room, I realized the nightmare wasn't over. The motel was surrounded by thick woods, a high fence blocking any escape. I ran through the grounds looking for a way out, but it was like a maze, leading me in circles. Just when I thought I'd found an opening, I saw him again, standing there, his smile gone now, replaced by cold, empty eyes. "No one ever leaves," he said, his voice echoing in the still night. "You can run all you want, but the last room always keeps its guests." I felt my knees buckle as the reality of the situation hit me. There was no escape, no way out of this twisted nightmare. I was trapped, just like the others, and now I understood. The last room wasn't just a place, it was a sentence, and I had just been condemned. I arrived at the hotel late, well past midnight. The kind of late where even the roads feel deserted, and the world seems different. The hotel was old, with a weathered sign barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't my first choice, but after driving for hours with no rest, it was the only option. The receptionist was an older man, quiet and tired looking. He handed me the key without much conversation, and I didn't push for any. I just wanted to sleep. The room was on the second floor, down a long, narrow hallway that seemed to stretch forever. The carpet was worn, and the walls had an odd, stale smell, but I was too exhausted to care. When I entered the room, it was plain, almost sterile, except for one thing that caught my attention immediately: a large mirror above the dresser. It was an old mirror, the kind with dark spots on the glass, as if it had seen too much over the years. Mirrors have always made me uneasy, especially at night, but I ignored the feeling, brushing it off as silly. I dropped my bag on the floor and went to wash up. As I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. At first, I thought it was just my reflection, but something was off. It looked like there was someone standing behind me, just outside of the mirror's frame. My heart jumped, and I quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, and the door was locked. I stared at the mirror, trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, or maybe my tired eyes playing games with me. I had been driving for hours after all. My body was tired, my mind worn out. I shook my head and turned off the lights, climbing into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. The feeling was so strong that I kept looking back at the mirror. I knew it was irrational, but every time I glanced at it, I saw the shadowy figure getting closer, becoming clearer. It wasn't just my reflection. I could see the outline of a person, standing there, almost merging with my own reflection. The more I looked, the more real it seemed, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to sleep, pulling the covers over my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My mind kept replaying the image, the figure, the eyes in the mirror staring back at me. What if there really was someone? What if I wasn't alone? The minutes stretched into hours, and my fear grew with each passing moment. I started to question myself. Was I losing my mind? Was it all just stress and exhaustion? But every time I looked at the mirror, the figure was there, clearer, more distinct. It was watching me, waiting. Desperation took over. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie there paralyzed by fear. I decided to confront it. Maybe if I moved the mirror or covered it up, the feeling would go away. I got out of bed, my legs shaking, and slowly approached the mirror. My eyes were fixed on the figure, now more visible than ever. It was me, but not me. The reflection was twisted, the face filled with fear and something else. Anger, hatred, I couldn't tell. As I stood there, staring at my own reflection, the figure in the mirror moved on its own, stepping forward when I didn't. Its eyes locked onto mine, and a cold wave of terror washed over me. I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to look away. It felt like the mirror was pulling me in, trapping me inside its world. In that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just a reflection. It was something more, something that wanted to take my place. The stories I had heard, the rumors about this hotel, about how people had lost their minds here, suddenly made sense. The mirrors showed you your worst fears, twisted them, made them real. Panic set in. I couldn't let it win. I couldn't let the mirror trap me. I had to do something, anything. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ashtray, and threw it at the mirror with all my strength. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and for a moment I felt relief. I had broken it. I was free. But the relief was short-lived. As the shards fell to the floor, I realized the reflection hadn't disappeared. Instead, it was everywhere, in every tiny piece of broken glass, staring back at me from all angles. Each fragment showed a piece of the twisted face, now multiplied, surrounding me. I backed away, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. There was no escape. The reflection was everywhere, closing in on me, filling the room with its presence. I could see my own fear reflected back at me, growing, consuming me. I screamed, a sound filled with pure terror, but the room was silent. The only thing I could hear was the echo of my own voice in my head, the broken pieces of the mirror trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I don't know what happened after that. When the staff found me the next morning, I was curled up in the corner, surrounded by shattered glass. They said I was screaming about the mirrors, about something watching me, but I don't remember much. All I know is that I'm never going back to that hotel, and I'll never trust another mirror again.